Hey everyone, in this video we'll be exploring for loops in Python. For loops are an essential tool for automating repetitive tasks and iterating over collections of data. Let's start by understanding for loops and why they're so powerful in Python. For loops are different than while loops because a for loop allows us to repeat a block of code a specific number of times, or iterate through elements in a collection like lists. This makes it an excellent choice when we want to execute the same code multiple times without writing it over and over. The basic syntax for a for loop in Python is quite straightforward. We use the for keyword followed by a variable that will represent each item in the collection being iterated over, and then we use the in keyword followed by the collection we want to loop through. Finally, we put a colon at the end of the line, and the code block that follows will be executed for each element in the collection. Note that the code block must be indented to indicate that it belongs to the for loop. Python uses indentation for code blocks, and consistent indentation is essential for avoiding errors. Let's dive into a practical example of a for loop using a list. We'll create a list of numbers and use a loop to print each element by iterating or moving through the list. So whenever I say iterating, it just means moving through whatever we're iterating. So our list numbers is equal to a list containing 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. Now we'll say, hey Python, let's execute the following code for every number in numbers. So we'll do for num in numbers, for every num in numbers. Num is a variable we are creating just for this for loop. For every iteration, num will be set to the next item in the loop. So we'll print num, and so every time num will be the next item in the list for every iteration of the loop. And so when we run this, we get 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 because the first time num was 1, second time 2, 3, 4, and so on, and it printed all of them. So when we ran that code, it printed each number in the list on a separate line. This is a much better way to iterate through a list than with while loops like we've done before. Here's an example of a while loop doing the exact same thing. So I'm just going to put a separator here, unindented. We'll just put a separator so we can separate the two for loops. And now we can set index to 0, because remember we have to have a counter variable. And then we set while index is less than the length of numbers. We'll print numbers and then index. So we're getting the current item in the list by referencing the index of whatever the variable index is. And then we make sure to increment index by 1. And so this does the same exact thing. And so as you can see, it's clearly a better choice to use a for loop when iterating through items in a list. While loops are meant to repeat code until a statement is false, while for loops are meant to iterate through a collection. And it just makes more sense in readability too, because you're saying for every number in numbers, it makes sense. While over here we have this variable index, and it's while index is less than the length of numbers with using this function and stuff. And then we have to reference the actual index and then increment our thing, when all we have to do is write 2 lines of code, and over here we have to write 4. It's always a better choice to use a for loop when iterating through a list. For loops aren't limited to lists. We can use them with other data types, including strings. We can also use them with other data types that we will learn later in the course, like dictionaries and tuples. Let's explore how to iterate over characters in a string. So our message will equal hello world, and for every character in message, we will print char. And so char can be named whatever you want. You could even just name it X if you wanted. It's just not a good idea since it's hard to read it. But for every character in message, you could even do character like this, and it would still work. And so we're printing that character. So whenever you're using a for loop on a string, it will count each character as an iteration item instead of an item in a list, because this isn't a list, it's a string. Here we get hello world. Each letter is printed on a separate line, and there we go. For loops can be used for more than just printing elements. We can utilize them to perform various computations, like calculating the sum of a list of numbers. So we can have a list called numbers, and that's equal to a list 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. And then we can have a variable sum of numbers, and that's 0 to start. And we can say for every number in numbers, and we'll say sum of numbers equals sum of numbers plus number. So this is adding whatever the current number is to the sum of numbers. And we're not getting the length of the list, we're just adding 1 plus 2 plus 3 plus 4 plus 5. And so when we print sum of numbers, we will get 15, because 1 plus 2 plus 3 plus 4 plus 5 is 15. Another useful tool for loops is the range function. The range function generates a sequence of numbers that we can use to control the number of iterations in the loop. This is useful when we want to repeat code a specified number of times. For example, we might want to print a certain code 5 times. So over here we could say for I in range, so this is for every I or whatever, for every item in range 5. And so range is just that function that I just talked about, and we print hello world. And so this will print it 5 times. When we extend this, it's 5 times. That's because range actually returns a sequence of numbers, which we can iterate through. So we've iterated through range, and it was 5 times. So if you ever want to repeat something a number of times, you just do range and then whatever number. The range function can take additional arguments to control the starting point and the step size. If we wanted to start our range at 1 instead of 0, we could do it like this. 1 and then 5, 2 arguments. This would print hello world only 4 times because we started at 1 and went up to 5. Just like indexing, we start at a number and we end before hitting the endpoint. So for this example, we repeat 4 times because we started at 1 and went up to but not including 5. You could also change the step. If you remember, when indexing a string or list, you can control the step or how many numbers it jumps. Well, you could do that with range as well. So we can just add another argument here. And let's actually change this to 10 so that there's more numbers, and we'll do 2. And let's actually change this to 2 over here, so we start at 2. So we're starting at 2, going up 2, but not including 10, and going by a step of 2. And so it's the same order as when you're indexing. And so let's actually print I, so you can see what's going on under the hood. So you can see what number is actually being evaluated here. We get 2, 4, 6, 8, because we start at 2, so we got 2. Then we'll go up to, but not including 10. So if we did 11, it would include 10. And then we go by a step of 2, so that's why we get only 2, 4, 6, and 8, and not 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. And so if we actually started at 1, we'd get 1, 3, 5, 7, 9. Like that. For loops can also be nested inside each other to perform more complex tasks. Let's see an example of a nested for loop. So we have for I in range 3, we'll do it 3 times, and then inside here we do another for loop for j in range 2, and we'll just print I, and actually we'll do print I plus a space and then j, and we'll actually have to convert these 2 strings as well. Sorry about all this code, it looks a little bit verbose, but we'll just write it down. So we're basically just printing I and j, and we actually get 6 print statements because we have nested for loops. So instead of doing it 3 times or doing it 2 times, we actually do it 6 times. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. They're both at 0. We go back to this loop, right? And for the second time, then it changes to 1. It'll only ever get to 1 because this is only executed 2 times, so it goes 0, 1. That's why we start at 0, but they're both 0, and then it goes back to the top of this loop right here, changes to 1. Then when this loop is done, it goes all the way back to the top here and does this thing again for the second time, and then the third time, and that's why we get 0, 0, 0, 1, 1, 0, 1, 1, 2, 0, 2, 1. If it's confusing, I get it. Nobody completely understands nested for loops the second they learn it, so it's fine if you don't remember this specific thing. Congratulations, you've now unlocked the power of for loops in Python. For loops are an essential tool for iterating over collections and automating repetitive tasks in your Python programs. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.